and welcome back to my channel. I've made several videos where I've made items using the log cabin design and using the sew as you go or quilt as you go technique. I'll leave the links to those in the description box if you'd like to take a look at those. One is a log cabin pot holder, and the other is a baby quilt that I made using the log cabin design. So today I'm doing a different take on it and making a heart log cabin block. I keep my scraps of fabric in Ziploc bags according to color. And so I went through the bag that had the red scraps and I made 3 piles, very small scraps, medium size, and then longer size scraps. And then I went through the bag that had the pink scraps in it and picked out 3 pieces that were very close in color. I'm starting with the smallest pieces, and those will be the smallest pieces of the block. The first piece I'm cutting is 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And that will be the middle of my block. I usually, when I'm doing a log cabin design, I do half of the strips light and half of them a color or darker. But since I'm doing a heart, I am just doing all different shades of red on this. The next piece is also 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, but it's in a different fabric. The next piece is in the same fabric as the last square, and it's 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Then this next piece with the fabric that has the heart pattern on it is 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Then the next piece out of the heart pattern fabric is a 3.5 inch length. The next piece was already the right size, and it was 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. That next piece also needs to be 3.5 inches in length. I'm cutting a 1.5 inch square piece from the pink fabric that I will sew onto that last piece before I add it when I'm quilting. While I was cutting the pink strip, I also cut a 2.5 inch length and a 1.5 inch square to use in different pieces. This next piece is 4.5 inches long. But I'm using 2 pieces, and I will sew on my sewing machine. I'll sew them together to make the 4.5 inches. I had a longer piece of that same fabric, and I used that for the 5.5 inch piece. This is the 5.5 inch length. The next 2 red pieces are both 4.5 inches in length. And we'll also use our 1.5 inch square pink piece that I cut earlier, and then the 2.5 inch length of the pink. The last pieces are a 7.5 inch strip and a 6.5 inch long strip. I'm going to use an 8-inch square out of the pink for the back of this block. When you put a block on point, it means that you turn it so that it's the shape of a diamond instead of a square. So when we put this block on point, we have a heart. I made some 2.5-inch squares out of the pink fabric that I may use when the block is finished to put on the sides to give it a different heart shape. I folded the squares in half and creased them so I will be able to have a sewing line when I sew them. I did make a pattern for this that I'm following. So you may like the heart pattern better without the pink little triangles on the side. It's entirely up to you. You can use these pieces to sew onto a block for a pot holder, or you can make up about 15 of them and use them as a baby quilt. I cut an 8-inch square of batting, and then I also cut 2 3-inch lengths to make some binding because I am going to make a pot holder out of this one. Okay, so let's get sewing. To make my binding, I sew the 2 pieces together, right sides together, and kind of in a crisscross, and then sew a seam in the direction that I showed you with my finger. I always check first after I've sewed it to make sure it's on right before I trim off the ends, the excess piece. That just needs to be folded in half now and ironed with a hot iron. Next, I take my 8-inch piece of pink fabric and put the 8-inch piece of batting on top of it and then pin that together. I was making a pot holder, and that was my original intention, but I forgot to put the Insulbright in it. And so that insulates the heat when you're making things like pot holders and oven mitts. So it's no longer a pot holder, it will be a coaster or a mug rug. Next, I take the 2 1.5-inch squares and put them right sides together and center them in the middle of the batting. Now I'm showing you the 2 pieces that need to be sewn together to make that 4.5-inch piece. So I just make a seam and then finger press it open and put it in order in my stack. You could fold the batting into quarters to find the center and stick a pin through it, and then put your fabric on top of where the center is. You can do it that way, but I usually just take my little sewing ruler and measure 3.25 inches on all 4 sides, and then I'm good to go. Next, I change my regular sewing foot, presser foot, into my walking foot. It's easy. I also wanted to mention that I am using a pink thread and pink bobbin thread. So now with the walking foot on, I am ready to start quilting. And I take those pieces that are in the middle of the batting and I make a 1/4 inch seam on the right side. I go down about a 1/4 inch from the top and I stop a 1/4 inch from the bottom just so it looks better on the back. I finger press the 2 pieces open and then put the 2.5 inch piece right side down and then stitch it up. Next comes the 2.5 inch length and the little heart and bow patterned fabric. Then the 3.5 inch length in the same fabric that goes over the top, directly over the first square that we put down. And I didn't measure right, and so it's too short. So I went back to the red bag of fabric and found a piece that was longer. This piece is exactly 3.5 inches long, but it's wider than 1.5 inches. And so I trim it up and then I'm back in business. Next, I'm putting this 3.5 inch length of this kind of checkered or plaid pattern. Before I sew the next plaid piece on, I need to sew the 1 inch pink square onto it. Right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam, and then afterwards I finger press it open. And then sew it onto the block. Next, I'm taking the red piece that I sewed together, and that I will trim that off to be 4.5 inches. The 5.5 inch length in the red fabric goes next. And oops, yes, I left the selvage on. Next goes the 4.5 inch polka dot material. But first I need to sew that 1.5 inch square of pink fabric onto it. Next, I sew the 2.5-inch pink piece onto the other polka dot strip. Then sew down the 1.5-inch pink piece and 4.5-inch polka dot piece. And then I sew down the piece that has the 2.5-inch length of pink fabric sewed onto the polka dot fabric. The last two pieces are the two solid red lengths in 6.5 inches and 7.5 inches. I goofed up when I was cutting and made the 7.5-inch length more like 8 inches. But that's fine, I'll just trim it off after I sew it. I'm getting ready to sew the little triangles onto the sides of the heart. That crease is my sewing guide, and so I position it against the corner of the heart, right sides together, and then sew on the crease. And then do the same on the other side. And then trim the inside pink triangle. I'm trimming all of the stray threads on the back and then trimming up the sides. If you wanted to make this into a quilt, here I am just showing how you could do every other block, a heart block, and you could either use 8-inch squares or whatever it turns out to be after it's trimmed in the pink or in the red fabric. If I would use the red fabric, I would use pink as the sashing to connect the pieces together so that the heart can be defined. Then I thought it would be cute if on the back side you had alternating red and pink fabrics. I have a video on how to attach blocks for a quilt as you go method, and I'll leave the link for that in the description box. Just remember that the heart block will have to go on point. I went ahead and put the pink binding around the block, and even though I forgot the Insulbright and I can't use it as a pot holder, I can still use it as a coaster. So there you have the Quilt As You Go log cabin heart block. Please like and subscribe if you like this video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.